So, morning, Ian, and thanks very much indeed for joining us. You were going to do a presentation at our conference next week, our social work conference next week, which is on the theme of connection. For circumstances beyond your control, that's not possible, so we're doing this recording. But I wondered if the best starting point is to ask you to introduce yourself rather than me choosing bits out of your kind of profile and introducing the that way. Are you okay just to introduce yourself as a way of us getting going?
Yes. Good morning, Mark, and thanks for having me on here today.
Oh, pleasure.
And hello to all the social work students and practitioners and lecturers, and hello to you too. My name's Ian Thomas. I'm a qualified social worker. I qualified 2 years ago. I've probably worked in fostering in the UK sector for about 10 years and spent a couple of years working in international development. And I'm also a former looked after child and ex-offender, recovering addict, and all the pitfalls that care leavers often fall into or can. And I guess all of those experiences have accumulated to bring me here today, and a degree of insight and experience I hope that can inform some thinking somewhere. That's the idea.
Absolutely. No, it's really valuable avenue, Ian. And I suppose out of that introduction, there's so many routes that we could take this conversation in terms of the value of connection. You
Yeah,
know, as a social worker and as somebody with that kind of depth of lived experience.
yeah, yeah,
Partly why we chose connection as the theme this year was the impact of COVID and the impact that that's had on people professionally as well as personally. Uh,
yeah.
I suppose the first question or the opening question really is what does it mean for you in terms of social work in general as a profession, and then the theme of connection? What does that mean for you as an opening?
So the I mean, so connection is evolved into a big word for me over the last few years, which we'll probably touch on in a minute. But I think for me, social work is, for me, social work is an independent profession that subscribes to its own philosophy, values, and way of sort of seeing the world and helping people. That's not necessarily completely different to other parts of the world and profession. And then it's a standalone profession, and governments and agencies and organizations subscribe to that when they want to be in the world of helping people and
Mm.
promoting sort of human change and sort of challenge, supporting sort of social situations. So that's what social work means to me. And I think the connection between government and social work, because there is a difference, is also quite an interesting phenomenon,
Yeah.
you know, because the government isn't social work. The government choose to subscribe to social work, which is an independent concept, and more my connection to social work is, that I grew up in as what we'd call a child of the state. Lived with lots of different foster families and children's homes, and then sort of that evolved into becoming a drug addict and homelessness and rehabs and in and out of prison and custody and all the adult services and kind of so social work's been a huge part of my life as a recipient, and then
Mhm.
also as somebody that's worked in the services for more than a decade now, which is quite a while.
It is, yeah.
um and I guess my relationship to social work has changed, and I guess a bit like my relationship to connection has changed as a concept.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think there's been any static accomplishment in much of what I believe about the world. If I'm honest, it always seems to evolve, and which is quite worrying because I don't know if what I'm doing now is really going to be what I want to be doing. Will I look back and go, "Oh, that was a good decision" or not? And
Yeah, sure.
but I guess I've just got to accept that's part of life. So, and I think for me, I'm just being reminded of a podcast I did with Lisa Cherry actually about social work and authentic connection,
Uh-huh.
and I think for me, you know, having sort of been a street homeless person who is addicted to drugs, and to be here, is sort of like I've had to come a long way, and you know, and sort of really like climb out of, you know, a hole that you know didn't seem to have a bottom, you know, or a way out. And I think that the you know, the only reason that that's been possible is because I've been able to accept and ask for help. And a lot of the help that I've asked for and accepted is you know, the I'd say that the common denominator within, you know, the context of that help has been connection of some kind.
Okay.
And I think for me, you know, the root of my addiction was disconnection.
Okay.
And then the pathway out of addiction has been connection and adversity. And I've connected with people through things like compassion, kindness, care, authenticity.
I suppose that was going to be a quick question, if you don't mind me kind of interrupting in. And it sounds like an either or in my head, and I don't mean it to be, but that kind of that change, I think you described it as a few minutes ago. Was that more about a shift of connection with yourself or with others? It sounds like a sort of binary question. I don't mean it to be, but
No,
that
yeah,
kind of
yeah. I mean, I can talk about a specific situation where I felt a specific connection with somebody in
right,
a
yeah,
event. But I think that another word for connection could be relationship. and
hmm
and how do I relate to you know, constructs in my mind that my ego has constructed as mechanisms to keep me safe, the blueprint in which I see the world through, and the architecture of that blueprint of the belief systems that become the engine that drive all of that behavior, you
hmm
know. And then people react to those belief systems and my behavior, and then that sort of justifies the status quo of my ongoing self oppression, you know, and
yeah,
negative connotations that I have around the world around me, you know. And I ended up in a police station at 21 years old, um 8 stone in weight. I'm 6'1", you
okay,
know. I hadn't washed or changed my clothes for weeks. I had no veins left in my arm from intravenous, you know, drug use, and I just abandoned the human being within, you know. And the only thing that was holding me together was a small degree of denial, remembering that denial is a psychological coping strategy designed to keep us emotionally stable in unstable times. And I was really on Britain's scrap heap, in and out of custody, you know, being arrested, no comment. You go through the conveyor belt of the criminal justice system, no real authentic solution to sort of human adversity. And no one ever said to me, you know, why are you doing this and how can we help you stop doing it? But one day I was in front of a duty solicitor in a police station in Brighton, and she
hmm
started speaking to me with endearing language, and she used words like sweetheart, love, darling, you know, and said, Ian, like, what are you doing? Where are you going with this? You know. And she just connected. We just connected, you know. And I remember
okay,
I just, in that sort of moment, I could see the truth. And I took a deep breath and I sat back in the chair and I said, I don't want to live like this anymore, you know. And that was the beginning of change. And I made a connection with her, and then I made a connection with truth. And
okay,
the I think you probably read this, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. There's a wonderful line in it, and it says that when compassion is present, then are we able to see the truth? Because my ego had constructed itself in a way that wasn't ready for that, you know.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
and that was the beginning of the end for me, you know, the beginning of the end for, you know, my addiction and the trauma
yeah.
and the pain, you know. And when I said that, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. um, so I think that, you know, ultimately as a social worker, you know, the first thing I need to do, I see my role is trying to engage someone. And you know, engagement, I guess, is another form of connection, right?
Mm,
You
mm,
know, I want to connect with somebody, you know. And I think, and for me to have, you know, real connection, I think that that needs to be authentic. And I
clearly.
think, you know, a strong characteristic of engagement, authenticity, and connection is compassion.
Mm,
You
mm,
know. And so, you know, and for me that's what was happening, because connection's connection, isn't it? But like, what are the characteristics attached to connection? And sometimes I felt growing up that practitioners would conceal a part of their identity because we've got to
yeah,
be professional. and it was quite sort of clinical, you know, and I never really sort of like understood that as I knew it happened, but I didn't fully understand why. And now I believe that partly it's you know, attached to sort of defensive practice. If they find this about me, they might use it against me. You know, it's sort of like a projected fear. You know,
yeah,
and
and
I understand why.
sorry, I'll just kind of interrupt you because there's lag, but I think it's a really interesting point. It's really interesting in the way that you then described that, you know, that meeting that you were talking about where the other person was using the language of love, I guess. You know, I just wanted to ask you because it is that side of the language that gets stripped out when people overthink professionalism in the context of, you know, the 21st century. You know, that professionalism somehow seems to be more limited than a human connection. And I was trying to form a question when you then started describing exactly that, you know, in the sense of, I think you just described that as people needing or choosing to conceal part of themselves in order to feel that they're doing a good job. I guess the logic is that flies in the face of common sense, which is that people need to be open-hearted in order to connect with people to do a good job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was thinking about language I was listening to you then. I was thinking about how important language is, you know, and I think it was probably language was the sort of caveat, you know, for. Well, I remember reading Neil Thompson's book, 2016, and anti-discriminatory practice, and he said that language is the adhesive that binds culture. And I just thought that was like a wicked statement. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that packs a punch. That sentence, doesn't it? You know,
totally.
and language was the adhesive that binded, you know, the connection, the care, the compassion, the love, you know, the language of love, right? You know, and then so I went from there in my thinking, and I'm thinking, well, how do we get to sort of where we are, you know? And then I thought about Eileen Munro's book in 2011, where she talks about the proceduralization. So we've got all these procedures in place, but what's it done? Yeah, I've done this thin assessment, CP assessment, parenting assessment. How's that informed practice? How's that evidence the outcome of the child? How's
Yeah.
that developed our thinking and our next steps? You know, it's the so what question. And I think that sometimes it's so I'm going to say something that's controversial here,
Okay.
and I'm open to the fact that I could be wrong, and it is based on inductive reasoning, i.e., all the experiences I've had. But it's been a long journey, so I hope that I can speak with a degree of, you know, authority in the most humble way. But my fear has been, and a bit like why I made the difference between social work and government at the beginning, my fear has been that social work is a profession that stands alone, it's individual, and it's there to represent people and people's needs and uphold human rights, you know, social justice, equality, so forth. But my fear sometimes is that it becomes oppression, it becomes a profession that you know gets hijacked by the state, and social work can go from a state that represents people to defends the state. And I think that that's why within our education there's so much stuff around ADP and AOP. And if you think about this, you know, structural elements and neoliberal policy writing and things like that, and I'm not saying it's inherently good or bad, I'm not about that debate, but
Sure.
it's there nonetheless. And so my fear is that the sort of over proceduralization of social work, the high caseloads, you know, pressure, all of that stuff, overworked, under resourced, is sort of kind of maybe the over professionalism and defensive practice could be a manifestation of some of the bigger issues that are going on, and that impacts language and ability to feel authentic and develop connection, because it's quite a sort of fear culture, isn't it? You know, it's I know a lot of young people that left care and sued the local authority off the back of subject access requests and stuff like that, and you know, it's difficult. It's really difficult.
It is, and I think that the influence that you're describing you know, sometimes is obvious in terms of people needing to follow procedures. I think there's also that really kind of insidious risk that people adapt and adopt what they imagine is expected of them,
Yeah.
believing that it is.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that sense of sitting down with somebody and having a conversation, whether you're employed as a social worker or any other professional, actually, it's within your own control how you relate to somebody,
Yeah.
regardless of procedures, isn't it? It's in your
Yeah.
control whether you're recognizing the humanity and the dignity in everybody and respecting that,
Yeah.
or whether you're trying to fill out a form.
Yeah.
That sense of agency within professionals
Yeah.
sometimes gets pushed away, doesn't it? Consciously or subconsciously, it gets pushed away because of what people perceive the role
Yeah.
as needing to be. I mean, just coming back to the example when you were saying about the solicitor, the duty solicitor using, you know, warm, human, connected language with you, you know, presumably she would have been able to do her job using harsh and impersonal language
Yeah.
as much as using human and warm, empathetic, connected language. And
Yeah.
that's the element that I think is quite important for people to recognize because that is in their control, isn't it?
It is, and I think that that's probably why we're here, right? To remind our consciousness and to keep interjecting these concepts into our consciousness, in because we know that it's important that we cultivate this, right? And I
Yeah.
guess that's why we're here, because we know it's in our control to sit here and have this discussion and
Yeah.
cultivate that energy. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's cool, like, you know, and I think that and yeah, and you know what? If you think about, you know, this solicitor within the paradigms in which, you know, she was operating in, you know, it wouldn't knock us off our stools to think that she could come in with a complete legalistic sort of insensitive approach. We'd kind of half expect that, right, given the paradigms in which she was operating in, but she didn't. And it's
Mm.
another example of agency and humanity in what can sometimes seem an unlikely example of it.
Mm.
Can I give you another example of somebody
Please
that's,
do. Yeah, I do.
yeah?
Yeah, I do.
So I come out of prison in 2009 after serving 3 years, and I managed to sustain 4 years of abstinence-based recovery. And anyone who
Okay.
works in and around addiction will know that, you know, relapse can and does happen, you know, and to cut a long story short, I ended up using again, and I relapsed after sort of 4 years, and I hit it hard, and 7 days later, I'm on my bedroom floor injecting drugs again, and thinking, oh my god, like my world's caved in, and all hope had been lost, sort of thing. And I phoned a friend who is a care leaver, and a fellow recovering addict at 3 in the morning, and I said, like, I've
Mhm.
messed up, you know, and I don't know what to do, and he come and got me, and he picked me up and he took me to a recovery support group the next day. I was in Bristol area at the time. I was living in that city, and halfway through, just before he come, I'd injected heroin and one last use up, you know, and I was sat on a chair in this meeting, and I fell off the chair because the heroin was strong, and, you know, I'd not got my tolerance back, sort of kind of thing. And he walked across the meeting and he picked me up off the floor, literally picked me up, and he put me on the chair, and he just put his arms around me and he held me on the chair, stood next to me for the whole of the meeting. And he rubbed my back and he said to me, Ian, I love you. And he says, you ain't got to be frightened anymore. And together we're going to get through this. And that kind of sobered me up a bit, and I remember it well. And then about 4 days later, I'd been going to 2 meetings a day, trying to kind of get some hope in my heart, a
Mm.
sense of I might be able to be okay. And I was like really like in a dark place because I'd worked so hard for so long and then just threw it all away kind of feeling, you know. And I remember I was in the car on the way back from a meeting. Someone was giving me a lift, and this friend phoned me up, and he said to me, I just want to know how you are. And like about an hour before that, something shifted inside of me, and I felt the hope creep back into my heart again, because I'd been experiencing some fellowship and connection with other addicts, you know, and just sort of like plugging into a cause that was, you know, a tool I could use against my addiction. And I said to him, I think I'm going to be okay. And he said, I'm so pleased to hear that. And he said to me, you know, I really love you, Ian, and I don't want anything bad to happen to you. Now, this is a guy from southeast London that, you know, spent 20 years in prison and grew up in children's homes. Those words just don't fall out of his mouth. I don't mean to stereotype, but I'm sure you don't have to exercise your mind very hard to get where I'm coming from, you know? Now, as he said that, there was a line in there was a song playing on the radio, and it was a Red Hot Chili Peppers song called "Don't Forget Me,"
Hmm.
and that song I listen to it frequently, and it reminds me of being in prison and crack houses and all the degradation that I put myself through, you know. And there's a line in that song, and it says, "There's a love that knows the way," and as he was saying that, that line was in the song on the radio, and I said, "You're going to make me cry," and he said, "That's okay," and I just burst into tears and I just sobbed, because it was the relief, you know, from all the tension that I built up, and the fear and the anger and the anxiety and the self-resentment for relapsing, and it just all came out.
Mm.
And again, you know, I mean, the Red Hot Chili Peppers they're in recovery. I don't know if anyone knows. Anthony Kiedis wrote a great book, Scar Tissue, the lead singer.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, and John Frusciante and the
Yeah,
rest.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, because I mean, they had band members die in the sort of late 80s, didn't
yeah. But the so for me, that connection that we made, you know, and it was sort of come within the form of the language of love, right? It was
they? Yeah.
like, and what I learned that day was that love is the antidote to human adversity,
Mm,
specifically addiction, you know.
mm,
And I'm not saying, you know, we go around loving everybody. Do you know what I mean? I am saying that, but obviously there has to be a constructive approach that's underpinned with, you know, some, you know, tested ideas about human life and human development. But it has to accompany it. Like, you know, I have to.
yeah,
I can't help someone without having a degree of love for them. You know,
completely,
you
completely.
know, like, you know, I really love humanity. I love human nature. You know, you know, I love animals. I love people. I love nature. I love the universe. You know, yeah, like I love that stuff. You know, and that has to feature in my approach. And I love the fact that I can believe, you know, that against all odds, human beings can make fundamental changes in their lives.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I suppose it just reminds me back to one of those definitions you mentioned, compassion earlier on. You know, and one of the definitions of compassion that I keep coming back to is the fact that its components are care and concern. And and I think, you know, what you were describing earlier on is that as a profession, that concern and the anxiety about concern became defined as a kind of procedural type of risk concern as against genuine concern for people at the
Yeah,
expense of the care element of it. You know, the care being that warm emotional connection that we all need to function as humans. We're wired up to be sociable, aren't we?
yeah, that's a
And it's
great.
it's been in,
Yeah, that's so insightful, Mark. I love that. Yeah,
it's that sense. It's really interesting about compassion having kind of come back into the literature, come back into, you know, it's in the PCF, isn't it, in terms of people demonstrating compassion. I think people don't fully explore these terms. You know, involved in those terms of potentially thousands of years of evolution of thinking as against something recent. You know, that
yeah,
element of what is valid knowledge actually risks being seen to be contemporary knowledge when actually it goes back a long way in human history. People have known this stuff. They
yeah,
just, as a society, we just forget it quite
yeah,
often. You know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think sometimes we can, like, you know, how we justify compassion and care and love. We, you know, we give it names like serotonin. Do you know what I mean? And you know, but
Yeah, makes it
yeah, and I think there's
understandable,
a sort
doesn't
of spiritual element to it, you know, and so going on what you say, so I live in a van full time. You know, I travel around and do independent work and stuff, and I've got a shower in the van. And recently, I've been debating how useful that shower is. Do I use gyms? Do I have stand-up washes? Do I use friends' house? Like, you know, and because it takes up space, and space is a commodity when you live in a van.
it? Yeah,
And then I was
yeah.
reflecting on how long has the shower been around in human history, you know, and it's a blip, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? And if you, it's the
Completely.
same, you know. So and they did all right without them before. Now I'm I'm not getting rid of my shower. I'm not going to shower. But I was just ruminating on this concept and thinking about other things. And we look at the cognitive revolution, as human beings, and we're able to think abstractly and develop value systems and politics. And it was even before then, right? It was, the care was fundamental to our fiber and our, our evolution and continuation as human beings, as Homo sapiens. And I'm sure the other 9 human beings that were about at that time, species, had care and compassion. And it's, in some respects, it makes the world go round. So all of these sort of new ideas that we attach to care and compassion and connection, and the assessments and the frameworks that we sort of subscribe to, which sometimes obviously take away or risk becoming too clinical, they've not even been here 20 seconds in comparison to the journey of human beings. And I wonder, if we had that broader perspective sometimes, would that liberate us from some of the conditions that we subscribe to subconsciously, that sometimes has become a conditioned response as a result of external demands? And do we really choose that given a choice?
And I think that perspective is so important, Ian. That perspective, I think, is also really valuable when people recognise the cost that these procedural approaches come at, as against just the requirement to follow procedures. That everything is a cost and a benefit, isn't it? Yeah. Actually, having a broader perspective at least enables people to make some conscious choices. And then that conscious choice about how we relate to people sits much more with us as an individual, rather than as something that's more detached.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been, I was just thinking, it's just been fascinating. There's so many angles I'd really like to talk to you about. I'm kind of conscious of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, endlessly fascinating, really. I suppose I'm just trying to form a question in my mind to try and encapsulate everything that we've spoken about through the last half hour or so. I don't have a particularly articulate question in mind, but I suppose it was going to come out as a sort of invitation, really, about if you had a message to people at whatever stage of career that they're at, if you had a message to people about what it means to open that space that is caring and humane and empathetic and connected, and to keep the space open through all the pressure of their work. Is there a comment that you could make about the value of having that space open?
Bloody hell, Mark.
I trailed that as a quick question, didn't I? As a wrap-up question.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so what helps me a lot is that a bit out of the side the box probably, but I believe that there is a reality beyond the animalistic 5 senses, and I believe that there's a lot of indicators and tools to access that reality. And for me, it's sort of prayer and meditation. Okay, I don't subscribe to a Eastern philosophy necessarily, or Abrahamic faith or any kind, but it's just that's something where I've come to, having been on the journey I've been to, and that really helps with my perspective. And of late, I've actually been speaking to some social work students, and what I've sort of been saying is that that everything we experience, I believe, is here to test us, teach us, and to learn and grow. And my daily prayer is that I hope that I can just learn and grow from everything, good and bad and indifferent. And I think that holding on to sort of that macro perspective, that there is a reality that underlines the totality of all reality as we know it, and there is something beyond this, I draw sanity from. And whatever I'm experiencing, whatever comes before me, I'm supposed to be experiencing it. I'm supposed to be learning from this. And I think that it allows me to sort of divorce myself from very limited human ideas that I can easily subscribe to, become quite self-centered and fearful and egotistical as a result of that, and kind of like lose sight of a bigger picture. Yeah, so I did say it was outside the box, didn't I?
I think
Yeah,
it's really valuable because
yeah,
I guess what you're describing is that keeps you grounded, you know, having that breadth of perspective. I think
yeah,
the word you used a moment ago was keeps you sane. You know,
yeah,
that sometimes people's fear is if they open out their perspective, they'll get overwhelmed with complexity.
yeah,
I think there's a real optimism in what you've just said, Ian, which is that opening your perspective and your awareness allows you to be grounded in quite a
yeah.
healthy way.
And all the stress, all the pain, all the heartache, it's an opportunity to learn and grow. If we see it as an opportunity, I've had a lot of negative experiences, but they've been extremely valuable. And it's I like the Islamic concept of jihad. I love that idea, the jihad, the internal battle between right and wrong. And although I don't necessarily subscribe to that paradigm either, I like it because it helps me shift my focus on from the specific example and come back to the philosophy of actually this is an aspect of a
Yeah.
broader idea and a longer journey, and this is necessary for me to participate in that. And I like what Rumi said,
Mm.
beyond all reasons of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field I will meet you there. It's about, it's either right, wrong, good, bad, black, white, yes, no. And we live in a subjective world that tries to lend itself to objectivity, and then we get lots of conflict. Do you know what I mean? And
Completely.
just let go, man. Do you know what I mean? Like, put in the action, do the right thing that you think at the time, it's informed by your education and your understanding and kind of the frameworks in which you're required to work in legally, safeguard people.
Yeah.
But you can't control outcomes because you're powerless over the outcomes. You can only put in the intervention with the most informed insight that you can have at that time. And you
Yeah.
just got to let go of that. And one thing that I think, as I talk a lot to foster carers, is we must start teaching people how to suffer. We always try and prevent suffering, and I don't think that always helps. We must learn to suffer. Suffering is part of being human. That is part of the human experience, and we must learn to suffer, because you can't possibly live this life without suffering. And everything is a feel better, feel good solution in the consumerist world, and nothing out there is branded going, let's be with our pain, let's be with ourselves. Let's review our attachments to certain ideas and concepts that we subscribe to. What's ticking the ego, man? What's pushing us out there to act the way we are? Let's learn and grow and be with ourselves. And for me, the bigger perspective allows me to connect to that, and I don't subscribe to the limited ideas that can hijack me, but I have to work with them still because they're important, and I do believe in lots of them. I hope that's
Mm.
all right.
It's great, Ian. I mean, thank you. I mean, in terms of making the recording usable for the conference, I just wanted to say thank you as we kind of draw it to a close. I mean, I'm going to go back and watch it now again because I think you've covered so many elements. You know, all of them have been really fascinating in a really developmental way, which is great. You know, in terms of a conference. So, thanks very much indeed for your time. I mean, that's been absolutely great.
Yeah, no worries. And I want to say hello to Eileen. I've never met her, but I read her books. And also, each individual, you're on the social work journey, and it's more than sort of going out there to help those out there. It's also about you having a deep and meaningful engagement with yourself. And that's beautiful. And please use that opportunity to take care, everyone.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thanks.